Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
Start your day tomorrow with The Daily Dog with Michele Forto, the morning podcast on Dogworks Radio. Apple Podcast reviewer Patty Christensen calls it funny, smart, and filled with all the info I want to know about dogs. I love this show. Wake up with The Daily Dog. Available on Dogworks Radio on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your shows.
From Dogworks Radio, sponsored by Alaska Dogworks, professional dog training in Anchorage, Alaska. This is the Team Ineka podcast. On the show, we tell stories from the trail, race recaps, and of course, stories about our dogs. Visit our website at teamineka.com. Now, here are your hosts, Robert and Michele Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. It's the Team Ineka podcast. This is Michele and Robert Forto, and on this week's show, we're going to be discussing Raegan. Raegan is an AKC registered Siberian Husky female. She's about 8 years old now, and she joined our kennel before we even moved to Alaska. So in March of 2010, Robert had come up to Alaska and was helping a friend out with the Iditarod at the ceremonial start and at the restart. And he got an opportunity to really kind of look around the area. He was hoping to think about getting a house in Ineka, but was liking Willow a lot. So he left a little bug in the ear of a friend of ours to help us look for property up here in Alaska. And then Robert came home and tried to sell the whole deal to me, and I went for it. So then the hunt came for, should we relocate all the way to Alaska, or should we consider relocating to another place in the lower 48?
That's right. When I first met Michele, I had already had the Iditarod dream firmly planted in my head, and at some point we were going to make our way north to Alaska. But first I had to convince her that we should get back involved into mushing, and that took quite a bit of convincing. We decided to check out properties first in Minnesota and then later in California. I took a trip out to Minnesota, I hadn't been there in several years, and looked around at farm properties that I thought would work for mushing. We found a cool place, but it just didn't work, so I went home empty-handed, so to speak. What was next, Michele?
You know, what was next was I want to call this a vagabond trip to California, because you were going back to my home state in the area that I grew up in Central California. I was kind of bummed I didn't get to go back. I wanted to see some old friends and some family members, but you got to take the trip, and along the way, I kind of guided you via text message, didn't I?
You did, and I was there for two reasons. We had met a friend on Facebook. Her name was April Cox, and she had racing Siberians, just like the ones we had before. And she also showed me around at some cool mushing properties in the mountains of Central California.
In the Sierra Nevada mountain range, just outside of Clovis. And for those of you that know me, it's dang hot there, isn't it, Robert?
It is. So I spent the weekend at April's place. I got to know some of her dogs and picked out a little puppy, I guess she's gray and white. What do they call that color?
I call her Gray Sable because she has two different colors of gray and a little bit of black in her. And when she was 4 weeks old, when you first met her, she was much more sabled than she is now.
So there's a picture we're going to place on the show page of me picking out this little girl that we called Raegan. Why was she named Raegan?
Oh my goodness, this story could be a show in itself. So Robert and I are horror movie fans, and we're also adventurous, I guess you could say. And when I met Robert 2 weeks after he had gone skydiving for probably the 160th time, and he had hurt his knee. And so here I am thinking about dating this guy who likes to jump out of airplanes because it's fun. And I was a big Point Break fan. Well, lo and behold, so was he. And in the movie, Patrick Swayze, who Robert kind of looks like, he played Bodie, And when he was the president of the United States of America robbing the bank, he was President Raegan. So Raegan is named for Patrick Swayze's character in the movie Point Break, but more importantly, on Robert's end of the reason why she's named Raegan is because of Linda Blair's take in The Exorcist.
That's right. We had a little puppy, but we did not have a place to move to. Was it going to be a crapshoot to Minnesota, California, or maybe even Alaska? But lo and behold, shortly after I arrived home, we got a message from our friend Dave, the realtor, and he had found the perfect place, didn't he?
Well, of course, he found the perfect place. Actually, it was such a nerve-wracking contemplation for me. I had never been to Alaska. Robert had traveled up here at least once before, possibly 3-4 times before I had ever come up here. And so I was pretty dang nervous. You know, in my mind, Alaska was the old shows that we would watch in 3rd grade on reel film where you'd see Grizzly Adams. That's what I thought Alaska was.
So a lot of our rabid readers and fans will know that we bought our place sight unseen, and I moved up on my own to Alaska in August. Our oldest son, Kyle and Michele, made the trek up here from Colorado with our Tundra packed to the gills with everything that could fit.
Yeah, and that was kind of an undertaking on its own. My dad and Kyle and Tyler actually built, you know, what I like to call the Okie box on the back of the Tundra so that we could really pack it with gear, protect it from the rain and the elements. And we set out to the Canadian border where I left Kyle to take his very first trip on his own at age 18 into another country and bring on that gear all by himself, which was part of the plan, but it wasn't part of the plan. But I think he is a little bit wiser for that adventure on his own. Don't you think, Robert?
Oh, I agree. So Kyle was on his way north, and Michele jumped on a plane to fly to Alaska.
After this short break, we're going to delve into much more about Raegan.
Team Ineka and Robert Forto are training for the Iditarod and are looking for corporate and individual sponsors to help chase this dream. Running the race is the easy part. Proper year-round care can cost upwards of $30,000. From feeding, vet care, travel to races, and more, we give the dogs the best. There are several sponsorship levels to choose from. Check out our website at teamineka.com. We will see you on the trail. Mosh, you Huskies! Gee-haw!
Raegan and Michele arrived in Alaska on the same day, both haggard from long flights north.
Although I was tired, it was still very exciting as this was my first time being in Alaska and I couldn't wait for the drive home to see my new little cabin in the woods.
We had to wait a few more days for Kyle to arrive from the drive up north.
When we arrived to our new little cabin, I was taken aback at first. There was a lot to do. So Robert and I got busy while Raegan explored every nook and cranny.
So Michele and Kyle stayed about a week here in Alaska, and it was time for them to get back home to run our business.
It would take about a year for Denver Dog Works to become Alaska Dog Works. And so Kyle and I headed home to do exactly that, take care of the business aspect of our lives, while Robert would stay in Alaska by himself virtually for a whole year, learning the trails and the surrounding areas around our home. All the while, he was making a lot of good connections with other mushers and teaching Raegan the ropes.
Those ropes she did learn. At that time, we only had 2 dogs, Raegan and a dog that we got from our friend Hugh named Shifter. I shared kennel duties with a neighbor for the next year while I got busy learning those trails Michele was talking about. Raegan was too young to do anything in harness, but she became quickly the diva in the sled dog kennel, didn't she?
She did, but she learned a lot being in the kennel with the neighbors because they already had a setup. So she learned how to interact and socialize properly with the other dogs that were close to her age, as well as older dogs. And if I remember correctly, you guys did have her in harness before the season was out in the late spring.
We did. Raegan and I spent that first year relatively alone up here in Alaska, and that would have big ramifications for what was to come.
Absolutely. Raegan is a sweet little girl, but she really only pulls a true pull for Robert.
And we found out very quickly, about 2 years later, when our daughter Nicole signed up for the Willow Junior 100.
This would be Nicole's first distance race on trails that ran right out of our backyard. We put Raegan on her team in the wheel position, and she did not pull.
And this would become Raegan's trademark trait. She would refuse to pull for anyone except me, and I always wondered why. Everybody kept saying that she was not a good sled dog.
Yeah, you didn't believe us when we would tell you that she wasn't pulling or that she would have slack in her line, and you'd say, "What are you guys talking about? She pulls fine for me." And that was the key. She pulled fine for Robert.
So over the next racing season, Raegan would run with me in every training run and several mid-distance races. It was time for Nicole to sign up for her first junior Iditarod. Did she leave Raegan at home?
No, you decided that it would be best for Nicole and for Raegan in particular to learn how to work with other mushers and other dogs other than yourself or your regular team. And what I mean by regular team is that a lot of mushers will have just that, the team that they go to every time. We try very hard not to let Robert do that, but a lot of times his A team, his go-to team, has the same 8 dogs on it every year.
So Raegan was firmly entrenched in her diva status. She would spend her nights in the house, sleeping on our bed and watching TV from the couch. Seinfeld every evening. Later on, Nicole had finished the junior Iditarod, and we thought it would be cool to write a children's book.
Yes, and who is the star of that children's book but the diva herself?
We wrote a little story about Raegan and a new pup that we would get from April named Bodie. We will tell his story at a different time. But that little children's book really changed our lives, didn't it, Michelle?
It did. It was a lot of fun. It was in our bucket list. Both of us had a bucket list to write a children's book. And we decided that it would be great to intertwine the story of Ineka and the story of Raegan and soon to become Bodie, and how our kennel is growing and prospering from the early 2000s into today.
Fast forward to today, and Raegan is now 8 years old and still doing her thing down in the kennel. She still runs with me on every training run and every race that I run on. She has completed 2 winter expeditions with us at UAA, and I don't know how many miles in wheel with her boyfriend Bodie.
I think that Raegan, with the races and training runs that she has done for Nicole for 3 years, as well as for you, she's been in harness since she was 4 months old. I would say it's safe to say that Raegan has put in at least 10,000 miles.
At least. So, this is the part of the show that is my favorite. We tell our favorite stories about the dog that we're profiling. Michelle, what is your favorite story about Raegan?
So over the first year when Robert and Raegan were living in our Fortos fort alone, I would come and visit quite often, or as often as my schedule would allow. And I would try very hard to bond with Raegan. Raegan is pretty stuck up, and she likes things the way she likes things. Pretty much like Robert. So I found it pretty frustrating to try to get to know Raegan. And I would sit on the couch and I'd pull her up close to me, and she would cringe and turn her body language away from me. She absolutely hated sharing the couch with me because when I wasn't there, that couch was all hers. This is an ongoing struggle today, but 2 years ago, I think I got smart. I went out and bought one of those double reclining couches that has the section in the middle where you can have your drinks and snacks and stuff. So Raegan has her side and I have my side. And now the two of us can cohesively sit and watch television together with Robert.
That is true. My favorite story about Raegan happened on the Tustamina 200, arguably one of the toughest races I've ever ran. It was literally 100 miles uphill on the sides of mountains, and I will never forget that. I remember when we pulled into the checkpoint, I was ready to quit and ready to scratch, and at the time, Raegan was running in wheel with Bodie. And I'll never forget waking up the next morning and there was Raegan and Bodie cuddled up together like boyfriend and girlfriend, snuggled in the straw.
They still do that today. They are very close and rely on each other for pretty much everything when they're out on the trail, which we find quite interesting. We try to keep our dogs in pairs most of the season, all of the time. It is recommended that you move your dogs around, and we do that from time to time, but Bodie has a tendency to get a little bit jealous when we let Raegan run with Seabreeze.
Yes, the story of Seabreeze is for another day. So what do you guys think about the stories of our dogs on the Team Ineka podcast? We would love to hear what you have to say. Please visit our pages at teamineka.com and on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by searching Team Ineka. That's INEKA.
Did you know that Alaska Dog Works trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michele Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dog Works on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.
If you like our podcast, there are a few things you can do. You can take a couple of minutes and go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also check out all of our DogWorks Radio sponsors and promotions in our show notes. Another thing you can do is go over to Facebook, like our Facebook page, and one last thing, please tell all of your friends by spreading the word about DogWorks Radio. We enjoy telling you guys the story of Team Ineka, and we hope that you give us a listen next time.
DogWorks Radio is produced by Robert Forto. Logo art by Angry Squirrel Studios. DogWorks Radio is produced in conjunction with KVRF 89.7 in Palmer, Alaska.
For dog training advice, you can contact Alaska Dog Works at 907-841-1686 or visit their website at alaskadogworks.com. If you have a show idea or would like to be a guest, please contact us by sending an email to live@dogworksradio.com.